The first rule was written on a sheet of yellow paper taped to the cabin door. Do not enter the forest after sunset. The second rule was stranger. If you hear someone calling your name, do not answer until you see their face. And the third rule was the one I laughed at. If the trees begin moving closer, turn off your flashlight and stand completely still. I had taken a winter job in Alaska because I needed money, not because I believed in ghost stories. By November, I was 3 months behind on rent. My old truck had finally died, my savings were gone, and every job I applied for either wanted experience I didn't have or paid too little to keep me afloat. Then I found an online listing for a seasonal caretaker at a remote weather station. 6 months. Good pay. Free housing. No neighbors. The only requirement was that I had to be comfortable living alone. I accepted before reading the entire contract. The weather station sat far beyond the last paved road, surrounded by miles of black spruce forest. A supply plane dropped me at a frozen landing strip just before sunset. The pilot helped unload my bags, looked toward the trees, and told me the station manager would arrive in the spring. Then he climbed back into the plane. As the engine started, I asked him when the next flight would come. First week of March, he shouted. Then he hesitated. Follow the rules. I thought he meant the safety instructions. But when the plane disappeared into the gray sky, I noticed he had been staring at the forest. Not at me, at the forest. The cabin was small but comfortable. It had a wood stove, a generator, enough canned food to last through winter, and a radio that connected to a regional emergency network. The weather station itself stood 50 yards away. My work was simple. Record temperatures, maintain the instruments, check the generator, and send daily reports. The first week was quiet. Too quiet. There were no cars. No distant voices. No lights on the horizon. Only wind moving through the trees and the occasional crack of ice somewhere beneath the snow. At night, the darkness seemed alive. Alaska in winter has a way of making the world feel unfinished. The sky stayed dim for hours, and when night arrived, it swallowed everything beyond the cabin windows. I kept the curtains closed. Then, on my 8th night, I heard someone outside. 3 knocks. Slow. Heavy. I froze beside the stove. 3 more knocks. I checked the clock. 2:17 a.m. No one was supposed to be there. I grabbed a flashlight and moved toward the door. That was when I saw the yellow paper. Do not open the door after midnight. I hadn't noticed that rule before. The knocking stopped. For several seconds, there was nothing. Then a woman spoke from outside. Evan. My blood turned cold. It was my mother's voice. My mother had died 4 years earlier. Evan, she called again. Please open the door. It's freezing. I stood perfectly still. The voice sounded exhausted, afraid. Please, it whispered. I know you're in there. My hand moved toward the lock. Then I remembered the second rule. If you hear someone calling your name, do not answer until you see their face. I stepped away from the door. The voice changed. At first, it was subtle. The warmth disappeared. The words became flat. Evan. Then the voice came from the bedroom window. Evan. Then from the kitchen. Evan. Then directly above me. The roof creaked. Something walked across it. I turned off every light and sat beside the stove until sunrise. The next morning, I found footprints circling the cabin. They began near the forest and ended at the front door. The prints were barefoot, and each one pointed backward. I considered calling for help, but the radio operator only said the weather was too dangerous for a flight. Stay inside, he told me. Then his voice lowered. Did you hear anything last night? I didn't answer. He was quiet for a moment. Don't tell me, he said. Just remember the rules. The radio went dead. After that, I started reading the yellow paper every morning. There were 14 rules. Some were ordinary. Keep the generator fueled. Never leave food outside. Report unusual weather conditions. Others made no sense. If snow falls upward, remain indoors. Never follow footprints that begin at the cabin. If you see lights between the trees, close your eyes and count to 100. And the final rule had been crossed out with black ink. I couldn't read what it originally said. Beneath the ink, someone had written, The forest learns. Do not let it learn you. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I convinced myself the knocking had been a dream. Then the snow began falling upward. It happened just after midnight. I was sitting near the window when flakes lifted from the ground and rose into the sky. Thousands of white specks drifted between the trees. The forest seemed to breathe. The branches bent inward, not from wind, toward the cabin. I shut the curtains and stayed inside. At 1:03 a.m., the power went out. The generator was outside. I had no choice. I put on my coat, grabbed the flashlight, and stepped into the snow. The cold hit like a wall. The forest was silent. Then my flashlight flickered. The trees looked closer. I stopped. The cabin had been surrounded by open ground when I arrived. There were at least 50 yards between the nearest trees and the door. Now the trees stood 20 yards away. I walked toward the generator. The light flickered again. The trees were closer. 10 yards. I remembered the third rule. If the trees begin moving closer, turn off your flashlight and stand completely still. I switched off the light. Darkness swallowed everything. I could hear branches scraping across the snow. Slowly, carefully, something breathed beside me. I held my breath. A voice whispered into my ear. You forgot the last rule. I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I could barely see the cabin, but I followed the faint glow from its windows. Behind me, branches snapped. The forest moved. I reached the door, fell inside, and locked it. Then I saw the yellow paper. The black ink was gone. The final rule was visible. If the forest speaks to you, do not listen. It is only practicing. I stared at the words. Then the voice outside repeated them. Perfectly. If the forest speaks to you, it said, do not listen. The voice was mine. That was when I understood. The forest had heard me, and it was learning. The next day, I found a hidden room beneath the weather station. A trapdoor was buried under old equipment. Inside was a narrow staircase leading underground. The walls were covered with names. Hundreds of names. Some were scratched into the wood. Others were written in blood. At the end of the room, I found a journal. The first entry was dated 1987. The writer had been a caretaker. He described the forest exactly as I had experienced it. The voices, the moving trees, the footprints. But the final pages were different. He claimed the forest wasn't haunted. It was hungry, and it didn't eat bodies. It ate memories. According to the journal, the forest copied people by listening to them. Every word, every fear, every memory became part of it. Eventually, it could create a perfect imitation. The real person would walk into the trees. The copy would return. The journal ended with one sentence. If you are reading this, the person who left the journal is already gone. I dropped the book. Then someone knocked on the trapdoor. 3 slow knocks. Evan. My voice. Come up, it said. The plane is here. I looked at my watch. It was December. No plane was coming. But then I heard an engine. I climbed the stairs and opened the station door. A small aircraft sat on a frozen landing strip. The pilot stood beside it. He waved. Evan, he shouted. We're taking you home. I almost ran toward him. Then I saw his footprints. Bare feet, pointing backward. I turned around. The forest stood directly behind me. The trees had crossed the open ground. Their branches reached toward the cabin. And somewhere inside them, thousands of voices whispered at once. My mother, the radio operator, the caretaker from the journal, and me. They all said the same thing. Come home. Conclusion. I stayed inside for the rest of the winter. I stopped speaking. I stopped listening to the radio. I covered every window and wrote new rules on the walls. But silence didn't save me. The forest already knew my voice. It knew my memories. It knew every person I had ever loved. By February, I could hear myself walking outside every night. Sometimes the footsteps circled the cabin. Sometimes they stopped beneath my window. Sometimes my voice whispered things I had never said. Then, one morning, the supply plane finally arrived. The real plane. The pilot stepped onto the snow and called my name. I opened the door. He looked relieved. Thank God, he said. We thought we'd lost you. I wanted to tell him everything. Instead, I smiled. The pilot carried my bags to the aircraft. Before I climbed aboard, I looked toward the forest. The trees were far away again, exactly where they had been when I arrived. For the first time in months, everything looked normal. Then I saw someone standing between the trees. It was me. The other Evan raised one hand and smiled. I flew home that day. Everyone said I looked different, quieter, older. I told them the winter had been difficult. I never mentioned the rules. But sometimes, late at night, I hear branches scratching against my apartment window. There are no trees outside. And when someone calls my name from the hallway, I never answer, because I know the truth now. The forest didn't let me leave. It only learned enough to send something back. And every night, when I close my eyes, I hear the trees whispering in my voice, practicing, learning, waiting. So if you ever take a winter job in Alaska and someone gives you a list of rules, follow every one, especially the rules you don't understand, because the forest is always listening. And once it learns your name, it never forgets. The first thing I noticed after returning home was that I couldn't remember the color of my mother's eyes. I stood in my apartment, holding an old photograph in both hands, staring at her face. I knew she had brown hair. I remembered the sound of her laugh. I remembered the smell of coffee in her kitchen, but her eyes were blurred, not in the photograph, in my memory. At first, I blamed exhaustion. Months alone in the Alaskan wilderness had changed me. That was what everyone said. But then other memories began disappearing. My childhood home, my first job, my father's voice. Every morning, something was missing, and every night, I heard branches scratching against my bedroom window. There were no trees outside. One night, the scratching stopped. Then someone knocked on my apartment door. 3 slow knocks. I stood frozen in the hallway. Evan, a voice called. It was my mother. Please open the door. I remembered the rule. If you hear someone calling your name, do not answer until you see their face. But I already knew what was outside. I stepped toward the peephole. The hallway was empty. Then my reflection appeared in the small glass circle. It was smiling. I wasn't. I backed away. The reflection lifted one hand and knocked from the other side. 3 times. That was when I realized the forest had followed me, not through the snow, through my memories. The next morning, I searched through my bags from Alaska. At the bottom, beneath my winter clothes, I found something I had never packed, a small piece of black wood. It was cold, and carved into its surface were 14 rules. But there was a new one. When the copy begins remembering things you have forgotten, do not let it see you. I dropped the wood. A voice came from behind me. My voice. I remember everything. I turned. The apartment was empty, but on the wall, written in dark letters, were 4 words. The forest remembers you. That night, I left the city. I drove for hours without choosing a destination, but every road sign pointed north. Every radio station played the sound of wind moving through trees. And every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw the forest behind my car. Closer, closer. Then my phone rang. There was no number. I answered. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then I heard my own voice whisper, "You should never have left." The call ended. My car stopped. The engine died. Outside, snow began falling. Upward, and somewhere beyond the road, hidden in the darkness, the trees began moving. Toward me, the snow rose from the road like smoke. I sat behind the wheel, staring through the windshield as thousands of white flakes lifted into the black sky. The engine was dead. My phone had no signal. Then the trees appeared. They hadn't been there a moment earlier. Dark spruce trunks stood on both sides of the road, forming a narrow tunnel ahead of me. I locked the doors. A knock came from the passenger window. 3 slow taps. I turned. My mother stood outside. Her face looked exactly as I remembered it, but now I could see her eyes. They were completely black. "Evan," she whispered through the glass, "you forgot me." I covered my ears and closed my eyes. When I opened them, she was gone. The road was empty. Then my car radio turned on by itself. Static filled the cabin. A voice spoke through it. Do not go north. It was a radio operator from Alaska. I leaned closer. Who are you? I asked. For the first time in months, I had spoken aloud. The static stopped. Then hundreds of voices answered together. Thank you. The forest had been waiting for me to speak. The car lights flashed. The engine started, but the steering wheel turned on its own. My car began moving north. I slammed the brakes. Nothing happened. The road stretched ahead, darker and narrower with every second. Then I saw a sign. Alaska, 1,200 miles. That was impossible. I was nowhere near Alaska. I grabbed the emergency brake. The car spun across the road and crashed into a snowbank. For several seconds, everything was silent. Then I heard footsteps outside. Slow, heavy. They stopped beside my door. I looked through the window. It was me. The other Evan stood in the snow. His face was pale, and frost covered his hair. He smiled. You're forgetting, he said. What? Who you are. He placed one hand against the glass. Memories suddenly flooded my mind. The cabin, the yellow rules, the forest moving through the snow. But there was something else. A memory I had never seen before. I was standing inside the forest. The trees surrounded me, and the other Evan was inside the cabin. He was the one who had escaped, not me. I remembered the plane. I remembered walking toward it, but I also remembered turning back. The forest had called my name, and I had answered. No, I whispered. The other Evan smiled wider. You didn't leave the forest, he said. I did. He tapped the window 3 times. Then he disappeared. My phone lit up. A new message appeared. There was no number, only one sentence. The real Evan is still waiting in the forest. The engine suddenly started again. This time, I didn't fight the steering wheel. I followed the road north, because somewhere beneath those frozen trees, someone was waiting for me, and I needed to know which one of us was real. The road ended at sunrise. There was no town, no gas station, no sign of another car, only snow, and beyond it, the forest. I stepped out of the car and felt the cold cut through my clothes. The trees stood perfectly still, their branches covered in frost. Then I saw the cabin. It was the same cabin from Alaska, the same chimney, the same broken fence, the same yellow paper hanging on the door. But this time, the paper had only one rule. Only one of you may leave. I stared at the words. Behind me, the car disappeared. Not slowly. 1 second it was there. The next, the road was covered in untouched snow. I was trapped. A light moved inside the cabin. I opened the door. Someone was sitting beside the stove. It was me. The other Evan looked older. His beard was covered in frost, and dark circles surrounded his eyes. He slowly raised his head. You came back, he said. Which one of us is real? He laughed. That's the wrong question. He pointed toward the forest. The forest doesn't make copies. It takes pieces. I sat across from him. He explained that the forest had been collecting memories for decades. Every caretaker who disappeared had left something behind. A voice, a face, a fear. The forest used those pieces to create people who looked real. But why did it let one of us leave? I asked. It needed a door, he replied. A door. He looked directly into my eyes. You. The room became silent. Then the walls began whispering. My mother's voice. My father's voice. Friends I had forgotten. They repeated memories I could no longer remember. The forest had taken them, and now it was giving them back. The other Evan stood. You have to choose, he said. Stay here or return home. What happens if I leave? The forest grows. And if I stay, it forgets the way out. Outside, the trees began moving closer. The cabin shook. Branches scraped against the windows. Then a voice came from the forest. My voice. Evan. The other Evan grabbed my arm. Don't answer. The voice called again. Evan, come home. I looked toward the door. For a moment, I remember my apartment, my life, the people waiting for me. Then the memory faded. I couldn't remember their faces. The forest was taking them again. I pulled away from the other Evan. You're not real, I said. His expression changed. Neither are you. The cabin lights went out. In the darkness, something began laughing. Not outside, inside the room. When the lights returned, the other Evan was gone. Only a trail of barefoot footprints remained. They led toward the forest. Then the yellow paper fell from the door. A final message had appeared beneath the rule. The one who enters the forest will remember. I stepped outside. The trees opened a path. At the end of it stood a shadow. It looked like me, but this time it wasn't smiling. It was crying, and when it spoke, I heard the words I'd feared since leaving Alaska. I'm the real Evan. The forest closed behind me, and I followed. The trees closed behind me. There was no path back. I turned around, but the cabin had disappeared. The road was gone. Even the sky seemed different. Everything was black, except for the figure standing ahead. It looked exactly like me. The same face, the same winter coat, the same scar above the eyebrow, but tears ran down its cheeks. I'm the real Evan, it said again. I wanted to believe it, but the forest had copied my voice before. It had worn my mother's face. It had taken memories and turned them into traps. How do I know? I asked. The figure looked toward the trees. You don't. The branches moved. Hundreds of faces appeared between them. Some were old. Some were young. Some were barely human. All of them were watching us. Then the figure stepped closer. The forest doesn't care which one of us is real, it whispered. It only needs one of us to leave. A cold wind passed through the trees. Suddenly, memories filled my mind. I remembered arriving at the weather station. I remembered the first night, the knocking, my mother's voice. But then I saw something I had forgotten. The night I left Alaska, I had opened the cabin door. I had walked into the forest. Something had taken my hand, and I had followed. The memory ended. I fell to my knees. I never escaped. I whispered. No, the other Evan said. You didn't. The trees began whispering. Choose. The word came from every direction. Choose. The other Evan held out his hand. Come with me. We can leave together. But I remembered the rule. Only one of you may leave. The forest wanted us to fight. It wanted one of us to destroy the other. I stepped back. No. The whispering stopped. The trees leaned closer. The other Evan looked confused. We have to choose, he said. No, I replied. The forest wants us to choose. For the first time, fear appeared on his face. Then the ground shook. The forest was angry. Branches wrapped around my arms. Dark shapes moved beneath the snow. The other Evan screamed as roots pulled him backward. I grabbed his hand. Don't let go. I shouted. The forest pulled harder. Images flashed around us. My mother, the cabin, the airplane, every memory the forest had stolen. Then I understood. The forest survived because people followed its rules. Every rule created fear. Every fear gave it power. I looked at the other Evan. Close your eyes, I said. What? Trust me. We closed our eyes. The forest screamed, not with one voice, with thousands. The branches released us. The ground became still. For several seconds, there was nothing. Then I heard footsteps. One set, walking away. I opened my eyes. The forest was gone. Only snow remained. The other Evan stood beside me, but his face was changing. His features faded like smoke. No, I said. He smiled. I think you remembered. What? You're the real one. Before I could reach him, he disappeared. The snow carried his final words into the darkness. Don't forget the rules. I woke beside the highway. A rescue truck found me before sunrise. They said I had been missing for 3 days. I told them I had gotten lost. Nobody believed the rest. Months passed. The scratching stopped. The voices disappeared. And slowly my memories returned. My mother's eyes were blue. I remembered my father's voice. I remembered my life. But sometimes when snow begins falling, I see footprints outside my window, bare feet, pointing backward. And every winter, a yellow sheet of paper appears on my door. There is only one rule. The forest remembers the way home. I never open the door, because I finally understand what the forest meant. The rules were never meant to protect us from it. They were meant to protect it from us. And somewhere beneath the frozen trees of Alaska, something is still waiting. Something that knows my name. Something that remembers my voice. And one night, when the snow begins falling upward again, it may come looking for me. So if you ever find yourself alone in an Alaskan forest, and you see a list of rules, read every word. Follow every warning. But never trust the final rule, because the forest writes those. And the forest always lies.